Khyla, and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution lays out that elections to the House of Representatives will be held every 2 years, and the number of delegates will be apportioned amongst the states according to their relative populations. The framers fought bitterly over the number, but eventually agreed that no single representative should represent more than 30,000 people, and each state should have at least one rep. Nowhere, not once in the entire document, does anyone use the word district. It's a point worth underscoring because today the districting or redistricting process has become highly contentious and often blatantly partisan. And the most powerful players in party politics sometimes seem reluctant to do anything about it. At this point in the cycle, slightly more than half of all the states have completed their districting and redistricting process. They've drawn their maps, but it's not too late for the public to get involved. Indeed, new technology is making it easier for citizens groups to draw up their own maps. Today, we talk with 4 people with personal experience in the redistricting process. Stephen Holmes, the commissioner for Precinct 3 in Galveston County, Texas, has held office for 23 years, and he's about to lose his precinct because of redistricting. Craine, a Michigan resident and an attorney, is also a social justice advocate who is the redistricting committee chair for Delta Sigma Theta, one of the first black sororities. Hare of the Pawnee Yankton Nation is the chair of the Colorado Independent Redistricting Commission and the first executive director of Culture Surge, an arts-based coalition focused on justice and democracy. And finally, Michael Lee is the Senior Counsel of Democracy for the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University. Welcome, everybody. What an eminent crew. I guess I'll start with you, Michael. You say it often enough, and you have a hard time remembering that it has to do with actual people. So just tell us what redistricting really is. And I'm right in saying it's not in the Constitution, right?
Well, that's right. It is not in the Constitution. The reapportionment of seats among the states is something that happens every 10 years after the census. But redistricting is something that we started doing just to make sure that districts are equally populated, and now that they comply with other requirements of law, such as the Voting Rights Act. And so it's supposed to be for a good purpose. It's supposed to make sure that we're representative. And, as John Adams said at the beginning of the country, legislatures, Congress should be an exact portrait, a miniature of the people as a whole. And that's really the idea that if your interests are at the table, then so should you be. Unfortunately, almost from the very beginning of the country, people figured out a way to put their thumb on the scale, to draw districts in a way that favored themselves or their party, and punish their political opponents and discriminated against people that they don't like. And that's something that even predates the term gerrymandering. Patrick Henry of Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death fame was governor of Virginia when the state drew its very first congressional map. And he hated a man named James Madison and tried to make it impossible for James Madison to win election to Congress. He wasn't successful, but this goes to show you that even the framers wanted to do this, and it's unfortunately something that's gotten much worse with data technology, but it's been with us a long time, and it's been something that we've really struggled to get right.
Khyla, to you, is there anything you would add to this picture? You also have been involved at a professional level in trying to kind of assess what's fair, what's not, what's serving the purpose of fair representation in this ostensible or aspiring to be country of a democracy.
Thank you, Laura, for having Delta Sigma Theta here to talk about redistricting. We are a predominantly Black, historically, sorority, so we're very concerned about equity in the redistricting process, making sure that communities of color, Black communities in particular, are not splintered in the redistricting process, ensuring that those communities are not split amongst many different districts or compact into one singular district as to minimize their electoral strength. And so we have been training our members across the country for many years about looking at those maps and being very strategic about how those maps are drawn so that they do align with all of those traditional redistricting principles that Carly aligned, but also include fairness and equity so that communities of color are able to elect candidates of their choice, and so that everybody does have a seat at the table when you're talking about electing representatives, not just on the congressional or even state level, but making sure that people know this goes all the way down to the school board level, city council, county council. And so all of those levels, we're looking to making sure that everybody does have an equal and equitable voice when it comes to selecting their representatives.
But I mean, Carly, coming to you, you have been part of an independent commission. How did that come into effect? And what are the many roles that people, regular folks, can play in all of this? Because it's regular folks' votes. And I'm imagining in Colorado, especially indigenous people's votes that came out so visibly and effectively in the last election cycle that are going to be targeted.
Well, I would just, on that note, as an Indigenous woman navigating the politics of this country, there is always a dissonance around watching our traditional homelands be represented in ways that don't map our core values and our community values. So it definitely was interesting being able to sit in that chair. And I think specifically in Colorado, and like many states, our communities are changing. In Colorado, the number of voting age people of color increased significantly from the last census map to the census map. We also increased in the number of people that came into the state in that space as well. We also have a map that we also have a number of people who are, I think, disenfranchised in many ways. So Colorado has a breakdown of roughly 28% Democrats, 25% Republicans, and then 44% independent in this state. Like, we are severely gray in many ways. And to Michael's point, you can find out what that gray is with sophisticated maps of the unaffiliated. But our process was set up to try to address some of those issues, to address the maps, because we had 3 consecutive redistricting cycles that went to the state Supreme Court because the legislature couldn't decide on one. So it was this centering of partisanship was challenging. The center of elected officials making those decisions, I think, was uniquely what made Colorado stand out differently. It's why the amendments were put into place. I think it's partially led to why 70+% of our voters voted to support these amendments. And the way that we are one of 10 in the country that have independent redistricting that don't have political officer representation. So our tenor, and we look all very different across the 10 of what that looks like. But Colorado set up a 3-3-3 or a 4-4-4 model. So 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 4 unaffiliated voters. And through that, we also had a voting process that was very clear. You had to have at least 2 unaffiliated voters of your mix and have at least 8 people of our 12 be able to vote something into place most often. And some of the core key decisions, it had to be 10 of our commission's members had to vote for it with the 2 unaffiliated markers in there. But I think the core question really is we are struggling. We are struggling in this country for power and access and influence. And we are growing and diversifying every single day and what that looks like. And yet the laws and systems we have in place have been manipulated or have never been clear about supporting that, have always supported a dominant white cultural framework to lead in this space. And so there is a lot of systems change work that we need to think about. And not only is it about how these maps get drawn, but it's about the people. Who's going to show up thinking their voice is going to count?
Well, this is very contested territory, and it has been from the very beginning. And I want to come back to you, Michael, on this. You mentioned gerrymandering. Gerrymander was actually a person, as I understand it. What is it? And then, it's important that we consider the origins of our data. And you mentioned that the census plays a big role in this. And we just took a census in the middle of a pandemic with the president terrifying all sorts of people from participating. I hope I'm not putting it too strongly. Michael.
Well, gerrymandering is the term that we use to describe political manipulation of maps in this country. And it comes from a map in Massachusetts that Governor Elbridge Gerry signed in 1812 that many people thought was really egregious. But yet, if you look at the map today, it's like not nearly as bad as some of the maps that are being drawn nowadays. But it looked like a salamander, so people called it a gerrymander, and that term stuck. Gerrymandering is something that has been with us really from the very beginning of the country, but it is something that is getting worse because in the past, when you drew maps, you did it by hand, and you could draw 3 or 4 or 5 maps, and you pick the best one that accomplished your goals out of the 3 or 4 or 5 maps. But now with computers and much more robust data, you're able to draw maps with much more micro precision. You can draw hundreds of thousands of maps using supercomputers in a matter of days, and then you can pick out of the best of those. You also have much more data about voters based on what kind of car you drive, where you shop, what you're posting on Facebook or Instagram. People can construct really robust models about who you are, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, how robust a Democrat or Republican you are, whether you vote in the midterms or just in the presidential years. And with that data, you're able to draw maps that really do stick, that really do accomplish what you want. And that is, really remarkable. And so, for example, in a state like Texas, there were, under the old map, Texas had 11 districts. Donald Trump won by 11 or more or 15 or more points in 2020. Now there are 21 such districts, right? They've made all of the districts that they hold in Texas much more super Trump districts. And Texas didn't really rely on a lot of big data or anything like that, but you can use big data to do that. And that's really a very anti-democratic, small d, pernicious sort of thing that is occurring around the country.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. Redistricting may sound abstract, but it has very real implications for our democracy. Our guests today work in the area of redistricting, attempting to change our processes for more rather than less democracy, and for more people to feel that they have a place at the table. Attorney and social justice advocate Khyla Craine is the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Redistricting Committee Chair. Her sorority is one of the most socially engaged Black sororities and one of the oldest out there. Philanthropic equity advocate Hare of the Pawnee Yankton Nation is co-chair of Colorado's Independent Redistricting Commission and the first executive director of Culture Surge, an arts-based coalition focused on justice and democracy through creativity. Redistricting expert Michael Lee is Senior Counsel of Democracy for the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University. You can also watch this episode on public television and on YouTube. To find out where, go to our website, lauraflanders.org. While you're there, sign up for our weekly alerts to receive information on all of our web exclusives, like my commentaries and our full uncut interviews. My full conversation with Majora Carter, urban revitalization strategist, is up now. After the break, we'll hear an excerpt from my conversation with Stephen Holmes, who has served as Commissioner for Precinct 3 of Galveston County, Texas, since 1999. It's the county's sole minority-dominated precinct, and he is the last Black Democrat on the commission. What can be done about redistricting like this, which will destroy his district going forward? We'll find out later in the program. But first, here's Artifact 22 by Eric Hilton of Thievery Corporation, a tune produced with an intentional mantra for these times. All we want on earth is love. Well, maybe also voting. In 2013, in Shelby versus Holder, the Supreme Court ended the preclearance requirements of the Voting Rights Act. What impact did that have on Texas? Well, for an answer to that question, we go to Stephen Holmes, who has long represented Precinct 3 in Galveston, a uniquely multiracial district where he has been the lone Democrat of color in the county. I asked him, what difference has the Supreme Court's change in the rules meant for him?
What happened in the 2011 redistricting cycle prior to Shelby County was obviously counties like Galveston in the state of Texas had to submit their maps for pre-clearance to the Justice Department. There was a map submitted by the Galveston County Commissioner's Court that did much of the same thing to Precinct 3, my precinct. The Justice Department kicked it back and said, no, this is not a good map. It dilutes the strength of minorities within this precinct. And the Commissioner's Court had to go back and redraw a new map. And fast forward to Shelby County, 2013, which strikes down the pre-clearance requirement. Galveston County goes through the redistricting process, which wasn't much of a process in 2021. There's no need to pre-clear. And so they passed the map, any map that they want. I think what people need to know about certainly redistricting and who it affects, Lord, to be quite honest with you, it's not about me as the elected official. It's about the community and what happens to the communities. I mean, elected officials come and go, but powers that are given to certain communities and the pride that they have. If you look at us here in Galveston County, there's so much pride in Galveston County amongst the people. You know, Galveston was the birth of Juneteenth. The Juneteenth, that's where it happened in Galveston County, Texas. So there's a lot of pride there. You know, there are many of the first in Texas. The first African-American Baptist church in Texas was in Galveston. The first Black high school was in Galveston. The first county park was in Galveston, in Texas. So there's a lot of pride, and there's a lot of pride in people there. And when I first took office, to be honest with you, Laura, there were people who when they were born, they had living ancestors who were born into slavery, Laura. So and then you take all that forward, and they lived through all the Depression and the Civil Rights era, and they lived through all that, and to see all this come back and get the clock turned back on all of these things and all these gains that these communities have made and that people within the precinct have seen transpire and take place, it is a huge blow.
What recourse do you have? I understand there's a lawsuit.
Yeah, but that's what the problem gets created without the voting without pre-clearance, because you have jurisdictions like mine. I'm sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of them who are experiencing the exact same thing that we're experiencing in Galveston County. So the only recourse is, without the Justice Department pre-clearance, the only recourse is federal lawsuits, and that's it. And so there will be lawsuits. I'm sure hopefully more will come. Hopefully the Justice Department will come down and file lawsuits as well on behalf of the citizens of Galveston County to try to rectify this change. Or if nothing else, I would love to see Congress pass voting rights legislation that would stop this and reinstate the pre-clearance aspect of the Voting Rights Act.
Commissioner Stephen Holmes, I wish you absolute luck, and we'll be watching, and thank you for taking some time to be with us today.
Thank you for your time, and thanks for having me, Laura. Thank you.
So is there recourse at the federal level? For that, we go back to the Brennan Center's Michael Lee.
Federal courts in recent years have increasingly become not the place to go in order to seek redress for harms that occur in redistricting. The Supreme Court has gutted key provisions of the Voting Rights Act in multiple decisions. It may further carve back on what's left of the Voting Rights Act in a case that the court will hear next October coming out of Alabama regarding whether that state has an obligation to create a second Black opportunity district in its congressional map or not. But likewise, the Supreme Court has greenlit partisan gerrymandering by saying that partisan gerrymandering doesn't violate the U.S. Constitution, or at least that you can't bring those claims in federal court. And that really has opened the door to a lot of racial discrimination, because what you're seeing around the South in particular is Republican map drawers defending maps saying, oh, well, we were just discriminating against Democrats. And yes, they happen to be Black, Latino, and Asian, but we weren't discriminating against them because of their race. We were just trying to target Democrats. And you, the Supreme Court, have said that that's perfectly okay. And it may turn out that the Supreme Court, in greenlighting partisan gerrymandering, really has as much ended up in greenlighting racial discrimination, because we're seeing that around the country in state after state after state.
Can you talk about the nature of your approach to map drawing?
So Delta Sigma Theta is a nonpartisan organization. So we're not trying to pick winners and losers as far as Democrats or Republicans are concerned. We're trying to look at fairness. And I mean, to be frank, yes, both parties try to get an advantage because it's all about power. And that's how we're explaining it to our members as well, is that redistricting is about money, power, and access. And this is why we're really intentional about looking at these maps, looking how they're drawn, making sure that when they are drawn, that we are looking at not only just the compactness, but also where people are living so that we can provide that additional insight to the map making process. It's been tremendously impactful for us to have access to free mapping software so that our members are able to go into those softwares, look at their own cities, their own states, and try to devise a map on their own so that they can see how a map could be drawn that is consistent with the traditional map making procedures, but as well as ensuring that communities of color are not split. Because while there is an argument, particularly on the Republican side, that they're just trying to advantage their own political party, but we all know that overwhelmingly communities of color in this country vote Democratic. And so there is a kind of a red herring to say that we're just trying to advantage our Republicanness when you can see by how specific lines are drawn, how you curve around this area of this city that is richly dense in communities of color, how it's fractured in many different ways, that it's not just trying to advantage their political party, but it's also looking at who lives there and splintering them accordingly. And so, like I said, we're looking at it from a racial and an ethnic lens, but not being deceived that there is a political aspect to it as well.
The way that this redistricting story is told is not the way that would engage most people. And yet I am hearing in what you all have to say and the involvement of the sorority and movement groups like the ones you represent, that there is a way for regular folks to get involved and that they are getting involved. I'm hearing a lot about, what is it called? Dave's redistricting. Mm-hmm. Carly, you want to come in on that?
Definitely. We were very clear and transparent. Every single one of our meetings had to be public meetings. We had Dave's redistricting up before even the census information was up for people to submit maps. 75 independent maps were submitted by individuals through the process. We had over 5,000 individual comments that were submitted through our portal about just general thoughts on redistricting as well as the specific maps. And we did 40 public hearings during pandemic times. So half of them are in person, or about a third of them were in person and a third were remote. Mixture of what that looked like. But we spoke to over 1,000 individuals in that process. I think the census process in this decennial was challenging in many ways. However, I feel there was such a strong outcry from community organizations, from local, state, and national philanthropy to make sure that the census process was supported by trusted community partners, to make sure we were getting to particularly communities of color and underrepresented voices, and communities that may have felt threatened by how it was laid out in the process. So it was key to have those partners on the ground in that space. It will be key for us to reach true multicultural democracy, to continue to not only work on redistricting, but in these voter restrictive laws that are coming into states. Because as you compound these challenges, it looks different for my aunties and my uckas and my uncles and my cousins about feeling like they even need to show up at all if the system is so hard against them. And that's why, for me, the sharing of this process led to a career shift. I am now shifting my role to sit in supporting people to engage in political process through storytelling, through cultural organizing, through collective narratives, and narratives that aren't about centering the democracy that we've created and then the structure of the democracy, but centering how we are in community together and how we can be better in community together.
Running out of time, I just want to let both Michael and Khyla in. Michael, quickly, anything you want to add about how people can get engaged?
Well, I think, last decade we saw a record amount of reform. A record 6 states enacted some form of redistricting reform. And a lot of that was citizen-led. In Michigan, everyday citizens got together and collected 500,000 signatures and put something on the ballot and pushed for reform. platform. Likewise, people are getting out there, proposing maps, commenting on maps, and it's much easier to do today than it was in the past because you can go online and draw your maps. You can go online and analyze maps. You can go online and look at maps and be prepared to comment. And so it's much easier today than it was in the past. So technology in some ways is making gerrymandering worse, but technology is also giving people a seat at the table that they didn't have before.
And when the Delta Sigma Theta sorority gets involved, I think your days are numbered, right, Khyla?
We will absolutely hold you to account, absolutely. And so Delta, I'm very proud of my members who have been getting engaged in this process. You can go on our Facebook page, which is DSTINC 1913. We created a Redistricting After Dark series to talk to various people that are involved with redistricting to kind of break it down and help people understand what redistricting is and how it impacts them, and then giving them resources with our friends in the civil rights community like Michael, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, the LDF, NAACP, who have a plenty of resources to help you understand redistricting, because again, this will happen once again in 2031. And so there's plenty of time for you to read up on it and understand it so that you can get involved in any level with redistricting next go around.
Great. Thank you all so much. Early voting in the first 2022 primary elections that take place in Texas began this month, with new voter ID laws causing ballots to be returned in massive numbers and new districts drawn, like Stephen Holmes's. At the same time, we're seeing in that same state an upsurge in citizen and civilian activity. Residents are getting involved, both to reclaim their election process and to change it, especially new residents, newcomers to the state, who see a future in that red place that looks a whole lot more blue. Is it a problem for more people to get involved in our democracy? For less reliance to be put on our parties and the offices of state? I don't think so. You can listen to the full uncut conversation by subscribing to our podcast, which is available at our website. For more information on this week's guests, go to patreon.com/The LF Show. That's a very special place where you'll find a suggested reading list and additional related episodes to explore, and also where you get an invitation to watch the premiere of this week's show on our YouTube channel every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. with me. All the details are at patreon.com/The LF Show. That's also where we remind you that our Patreon supporters make it possible for this show to remain free to millions on public television and community radio and as a podcast. Our Patreon partners get early access to our full uncut conversations, including last week's with Majora Carter or the week before with Imani Perry. Join our fabulous Patreon partners and get these recordings first. You also make it possible for all this content to remain free to everyone by the end of the day. It's non-commercial, it's without advertising, it goes out to hundreds and millions of people on public TV and radio. If you want to be part of that, help us by becoming a Patreon partner. All it takes is a contribution of $3 or $5 or $11 a month. So how about it? Go to patreon.com/The LF Show. Join us. Thanks for listening. Stay kind. Stay curious. Till the next time, I'm Laura.